And it's Friday night with Byline Times with me, Peter Jukes.
And me, Hardeep Matharu. And over the next hour, we'll be bringing you what the papers don't say.
And what the TV doesn't often want to tell you. Well, coming up, Boris Johnson faces a scandal, and what does he do? He flies off to Ukraine. Well, we won't be treating this cynically. We'll be looking seriously at Boris Johnson's trip to meet the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and talking to our reporter Chris York about what's really been going on in Ukraine 3.5 months into Russia's unprovoked invasion.
And what a series of scandals Boris Johnson is trying to escape, from breaching the Northern Ireland Protocol and breaking international law to the first flight of asylum seekers being deported to Rwanda grounded by the European Court of Human Rights, and the resignation of Lord Geit, Johnson's ethics advisor. We will be joined in the studio by Professor Brad Blitz of UCL, who's an expert on international policy, as well as Claire Pearsall, who's a Conservative councillor and a former special advisor to the Minister of Immigration. And we'll be dissecting what all of this means for the moral bankruptcy of Britain.
So, who does Boris Johnson sometimes remind you of? Well, former President Donald Trump said he reminded him of him. He called him Britain Trump. But over the last 3 days of hearings in the House of Representatives of a congressional committee investigating the January 6th insurrection, some dark revelations about the former president's antics and his conspiracy against the American electorate have been revealed. We'll be talking to American author and commentator Sarah Churchwell about how these January the 6th hearings have exposed a scandal infinitely worse than Watergate.
But we couldn't do any of this without you.
We couldn't. Nope.
We couldn't, because we don't have any hedge funds or offshore billionaires. We have you. So if you do like what we do here at Byline TV, please do consider supporting us on our new unique platform, Byline TV Plus. You can head over to byline.tv/join and become a member, and you'll have access to dozens of hours of unique content. You can get to go behind the scenes with our producers, and you can take part in the After Dark Q&A, which happens every week after this live show ends.
And this week, we'll be joined by Claire Pearsall and maybe Chris York, which she'll trying to find out. And you can ask them all kinds of questions we can't do on live TV, partly because we can't hear you, but also we could be a bit more discreet after dark. And as Hardeep says, the main way to join it is at byline.tv, but you can also sign up on YouTube. There's a little green button in the right top corner. And there's also Patreon, where all our patrons there also get access to these special added bonuses. And that's patreon.com/Byline TV. Now, this month we've finished our print edition, which is winging its way through the letterboxes, through the mail, or sometimes your email if you wanted to see it early. But let's look at our digital front page, Hardeep, and that is legitimized misogyny. Tell us about that, Hardeep.
Yes, well, this is a special investigation from Adam Bienkov, Sean Norris and Sasha Lavin looking at the Westminster sexual misconduct scandal. So we know that 56 MPs are currently being investigated for allegations. And what we really wanted to do here was dig into why this might have been happening. You know, why is this an endemic crisis at the heart of British politics? What are some of the factors that go some way to explain why Parliament is, of all places, rife with sexual misconduct, allegations of bullying, allegations of inappropriate behaviour after drinking and even drug use? So we've got a new investigation talking to people with experience of this, including MPs, people who've worked in Parliament, and really looking at the hyper-masculinity of the Johnson regime, as well as the gender imbalances which have been present in Parliament for a number of years.
Yeah, it's an amazing investigation. Just shows, and this is cross-party, that there's a lot of misogyny still around. It's a very patriarchal organisation. And sadly, this is what several commentators and people Adam and Sean interviewed said it's got worse. There's been a backlash against Me Too. Also on the front page, I bill myself because I don't often write for the paper or for the website, but I've written up the historic, I'd say, verdict on Carol Cadwalladr. Banks versus Cadwallader. It's been rumbling on for years. It's to do with Russian interference in British elections, and she won her libel case. It's a very important judgment, because the judge found even more meetings, Hardeep, than Carol and I found through these emails. So, in a way, the other side of legitimized misogyny is the treatment of women journalists, often in the forefront of attacks online. And so it's a good day when one of the best investigative journalists, I'd say, in Britain of our generation, has been vindicated in court. Meanwhile, our Byline TV team have been doing their own investigations. About 2 weeks ago, they started looking at this strange proliferation of candy stores in Oxford Street, setting up, selling very little product, apparently, closing down. And their investigation seems to have triggered an investigation by the council. So they spoke to Westminster Councillor just today to see what had happened, perhaps as a result of their investigative report.
So in terms of the candy shops, as I said, there is a clear enforcement piece that is going on at the moment, and we are ramping up pressure on landlords to make sure that they are taking responsibility for who is letting out space in their buildings. What happens is these firms come into being at Companies House, get created, and then they close down within the year before they are due to pay their bills for business rates, and that means that the taxpayer loses out. And someone is walking away with a profit. I'm not privy to the operational side of the raids. Obviously, we've got the haul, and we had it here in our office. So the haul we had this week brought in 2,246 counterfeit Wonka bars, 2,800 disposable vapes, 223 fake toys with no safety labels, and almost 1,400 counterfeit mobile phone covers. So a haul of a range of different products that shouldn't be being sold on Oxford Street. Yeah, so it's that desk there. So that was full, and this was just a fraction of the haul. It was primarily the chocolate bars and the and some of the vapes. So that was so. Obviously, we're talking. Yeah, it's 100 grand's worth of goods. We're calling on the government to provide greater support, and the economic crime bill this summer is going to be a great opportunity to improve transparency in Companies House and ensure that they and other government agencies have the enforcement capacity to help us tackle this problem, which is affecting the high street. It's putting consumers at risk, but it's a real threat to the vitality of Oxford Street and London as a whole. Anyone who spends time walking down Oxford Street sees these shops, knows that they're out of place on what is supposed to be not only Westminster's, but London's, and quite often, in many cases, Europe's premier shopping street.
Well, it's so great to be joined in the studio by Chris York. We've never met. We've spoken on Zoom, we've spoken on the phone, and he's written some brilliant reports for us from Ukraine, from the Polish border, searing stories of things like people trafficking, and you know the country of old. And I suppose our first question to you is, because it's quite strange to British people, that Boris Johnson is quite popular in Ukraine. And so him turning up today makes sense from a Ukrainian point of view.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's absolutely beloved over there. Like, you meet Ukrainian people and you try and explain to them what's going on with Partygate and, you know, any of the various scandals that he's involved in at the moment, and they just don't care at all.
He gives them weapons. I mean, he's been very bombastic, supportive. Yeah. To be fair, wasn't it? These weapons, the training goes back to 2014 before Johnson's involvement, doesn't it? So, but there was a big event also yesterday, which was, and I was in Brussels when it was being talked about and planned, or was it this morning, that the Ukraine has candidate status for the EU, and the president of France, of Germany, or the chancellor of Germany, and of Italy turned up. Was that not more important to them, actually, really?
I mean, I think with the EU candidate status, obviously it's great, but it's not going to change anything quickly on the ground. It's unlikely to kind of change the course of the war. It might be great in the future once the war's finished, and if by the time that the war is over, like the EU process is somewhere on the way to being completed, then it will be great for reconstruction and rebuilding the economy and things. But I think in terms of most Ukrainian people's current like needs, which is like getting the war over and done with, it's not really going to affect that.
Do they realise also the refugee status here, that, you know, it's been much more difficult for Ukrainian refugees to get to UK. That passes them by. There are many more in Germany, obviously Poland and Lithuania and Moldova are the main sources.
Yeah, I mean, I think the majority of people who have left Ukraine to be refugees have already done so, and you know they're in whichever country that they've ended up. So I guess it's fairly irrelevant in that sense.
So let's catch up on the war then, because the good thing that John's, when you agree, Hardeep, they at least brought it back on the front pages. And there has been a narrative of Ukraine is losing, having done so well after the massive withdrawal from Kiev and Kharkiv, that it's doing really badly. But Russia, the second largest army in the world, has thrown all its might into the Donbass, particularly the Luhansk region. And it seems to be advancing only a few kilometers a day. I know there's massive carnage, massive artillery strikes. But is this really a success for Russia? Is Ukraine, in a way, building up some of the suffering and the danger because they want more arms? And actually, aren't they doing rather well, even in Donbass?
I guess it depends where you look at it. I mean, it's really difficult to know what's actually going on because you rely on the Russian government to report their casualties on one side and the Ukrainian government to report them on the other side. And like you mentioned there, like we know that the Russians certainly aren't accurate, and the Ukrainians, it's up in the air how accurate they're being with that information. But yeah, if you look at it in terms of, I always say like on the 23rd of February, Russia was a global military superpower. And then within a few days, they weren't, because it was shown to just be like a paper tiger, essentially. And, you know, they've had to withdraw. Ukraine is winning the war in the sense that they fended off Russia's original aims, and they're holding them back in the east currently. But I guess the question is, like, how long can that continue? I mean, like, we don't know the numbers of people who are being killed at the moment, but one thing that is for certain is that it's a lot.
Yeah.
And
the devastation. I mean, just that we've had Tom Much going down there, and he just says you just don't know what it's like. Even in Kharkiv, it's just massive destruction. There is a discussion in Europe. I was in Brussels, and it's been described by this guy, Ivan Krastev, I think is quite well-known Bulgarian writer, that in the world now moving in this summer of not quite stalemate, but things apparently being quieter and less dramatic, the peace party and the justice party had that late. So there's some people say Ukraine should concede for the sake of peace, and others say there will be no peace without justice. What's your feelings about that? And obviously Ukrainians are probably in the justice party, but can you explain to that the resolve of the Ukrainians this summer?
I mean, I don't think that conceding territory and reaching any kind of peace deal currently is on the table for Ukrainians, because all the Ukrainians I know, and I can't speak for all Ukrainians obviously, but like everyone, and I think it's correct that if there's a peace deal now and the war kind of stopped, Russia would just try again later. I mean, they failed to take Kyiv the first time around, but I mean, I think it's still on the cards for Putin. That's his ultimate aim.
So you think there was even though these massive casualties, but obviously in a way, once somebody's died, I suppose you don't want their death to be in vain. Every day I see a lot of women, you know, that amazing Maidan protester, he got killed in the Donbass. That makes more people more resolved to carry on fighting.
I just don't think there's a compromise option for Ukrainians. They're fighting like for their lives and their state and their entire identity, and you can't compromise on those things. And I think that's the view that they have on it. So it's just win the war. It's the only option for them, I think.
Yeah.
And Chris, you've written a few articles for Byline Times, I think right at the beginning, and then another one about 1.5 months ago, where you were telling our readers what Ukrainian people want you to know in the West, in the UK, about some of, you know, the reality versus some of the misconceptions that have been building up around Russia's invasion. What would you say Ukrainian people would want us sitting here and our audience to know now about what has happened and how it's going?
Ooh,
You had 5 points then. One was that the war had started in 2014.
Not to put you on the spot.
Well, I mean, I think points like that, like, obviously not relevant anymore. Like, a lot of people are now, like, not Ukraine experts, but, like, a lot more people know a lot more about Ukraine now than what they did previously. I think probably the biggest thing is what we were just talking about, and this idea of compromise, because that is a narrative that pops up among certain MPs and quite influential figures. And I think that's the kind of thing that Ukrainians would disagree with the most, that is a narrative that's kind of being bandied around at the moment. But I think that would probably be the main thing, yeah.
And the problem is, isn't it, that, you know, capitulation, we saw what happened to the citizens of Mariupol, mass graves. We still have the situation not so violent at Kherson in the southern, which is down towards Odessa, where there are advances. Surrender could mean mass graves.
Yeah, exactly. Like, conceding territory isn't just a peaceful process where the Russians will come in and be like, okay, we're going to look after things now. We've seen what happens when the Russians are in Ukrainian territory, Bucha, Irpin. We haven't seen fully what's happened in Mariupol, but I mean, when that finally comes out, I mean, it's going to be 10,000 times worse than what happened in those small villages around Kyiv.
Very much so. Yeah. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming in. You're great reporting. Can you stay in the studio, come back for the Q&A section? I don't know if you asked.
That'd be fine, yeah.
You can. We'll get your drink beforehand.
Okay.
So thanks so much for coming in. I'm sure people have a lot of questions about what's going on in Ukraine. But meanwhile, though he might be popular in Kiev and get cheered, he's a very recognisable character. We all have a good, quite often, first impression of Boris Johnson. A few years later, it tends to pall. We went to Boris Johnson's constituency and did a few more streeters and asked his constituents how much they trust the Prime Minister.
Do you trust Boris Johnson?
No. End of.
What? Boris Johnson is not.
Trustworthy?
No, of course not. He's a useless man. Sorry.
Do you trust him?
No.
No? And why is that?
I don't believe a word he says, mate. He's full of shit.
Not particularly.
And why is that?
I just didn't like the fact that I was working as a cook all through lockdown and isolated myself for 4 months in a caravan, and he was having parties and doing stuff that he was telling us not to do.
Do you trust Boris Johnson?
Trust is a very big word.
No.
No.
No. Haven't done for a long time.
Does the face tell you enough?
And why is that?
Everything he says and everything he does.
I have voted in for him before.
And would you vote for him again? Vote for him again?
No, he's put me right off. I'm so sorry.
Yes, I'd say I'm a Conservative voter normally.
Vote for Boris Johnson again in the future?
No, I don't think I'd vote for Boris.
No, I don't. The man's an idiot. He shouldn't be in government. And then I could go on and on all day, love. The man shouldn't even be in there.
You can't believe a word he says.
So you don't trust him whatsoever?
No.
How about you?
No. I don't think he should be Prime Minister anymore. And look what he's doing to these immigrants. Sending them over to Rwanda, wherever it is. It's not right. The man's an idiot.
Do you think Boris Johnson is trustworthy?
Can't say I do, no. Reason being is because of, well, his wife couldn't trust him, and he's gone back on his word to the people a bunch of times as well.
No, I don't trust Boris Johnson. I think he's told too many lies.
Absolutely not.
No.
There's literally nothing to trust about him.
He's lied a lot, and he's been proven to lie.
No, not one slightest.
Why is that?
I think just basically he's a con man, a liar. He's lied to absolutely everybody in sight. He's lied to the Queen. He's probably lying to himself. You know what I mean?
Do you trust Boris Johnson?
Absolutely not. Not with what's happened, like in regards to the drinking.
Did you vote Conservative in the past?
I have, yeah. I wouldn't vote for him ever again. Ever again.
It's unfortunate we haven't got people like Ken Clark left. I'm not joking. The sooner they get rid of him, the better. And as for that Michael Gove, and they can take him with him.
So back to Boris Johnson's scandals, which is a topic we often cover on Friday night with Byline Times. But the fantastic thing is we always find new experts to bring on and give us their analysis of what on earth is going on. And this week we had a lot. We had the Rwanda flight, the first one that was due to send asylum seekers to the African country, being grounded after a judgment by the European Court of Human Rights. And we had the resignation of Lord Geit, who's Boris Johnson's ethics advisor, who said that he didn't want to be put in an odious position, as he said, by the Prime Minister when it came to breaching the ministerial code. So, who are our experts? We're joined in the studio by Brad Blitz, who's a professor at UCL, who specialises in international policy, and also Conservative councillor Claire Purcell, who was a special advisor as well to the immigration minister. Brad, I want to come to you first. So in layman's terms, what was the judgment this week from the ECHR about this policy of deporting some people who seek asylum in this country to Rwanda?
So the judgment is effectively an injunction, right? So it stayed the removal flight. And it said that the one appellant, this was an Iraqi asylum seeker, couldn't be put on that flight because there were still proceedings going on, and that shouldn't take place until those proceedings had concluded. But the basis for that decision was the rules of court. So there's a Rule 39. So this is not actually strictly part of the convention, but these are the implementing rules that the European Court operates according to. And the basis is that there should be an imminent and irreparable harm that the applicant is facing.
And so, just to be very clear, the ECHR has nothing to do with the EU, is it? And this is a common myth that the tabloids and even the government and ministers like to propagate. But these are completely separate institutions, aren't they?
Separate institutions. They were created differently. They're governed differently. They involve a whole different set of countries. So, I mean, Russia actually was part of the Council of Europe. The European Convention on Human Rights actually applies to a number of countries in the Caucasus, Ukraine as well. So beyond the European Union.
And that convention came out of what happened during the Second World War and the Holocaust. And, in light of this judgment, Priti Patel and the government have said that, no, we're still going forward with our policy. There will be a flight as soon as we can to Rwanda. And there's also been talk of, maybe we can leave the ECHR. I mean, what are the implications of what's happened this week and some of the kind of rhetoric that's been thrown around in this way?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of rhetoric, right? So rhetoric about leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, restarting or actually getting this plane off the ground because it's still there. Right?
At some high cost, isn't it? It's costing $500,000.
Tremendous cost. And when you look at the numbers of people who were due to be removed, plus you look at actually how many people ever claim asylum and receive refugee status in Rwanda, it's really very few people. So the whole exercise is really exaggerated, it's high cost and it's high risk.
One thing we compare it to, isn't it, is build the wall, which was the Trump policy, which never got built.
Well, a political move rather than a policy move.
Yeah. And there's, send them on a plane. People were trolled, I think. Even our political correspondent, who has a slightly suspicious surname, Bienkov, was to get you on a plane to Rwanda. It's become the new rhetoric of the right.
And also what's, in terms of this Rwanda policy, something that's taken hold across the media is this, explanation by the government that we need to do this to crack down on people's smugglers. What do you say to that justification, Brad?
Well,
that this is all to be benevolent and compassionate and to help people.
Well, it was only a few years ago when the government was actually saying we need to address the problem at source. And we know that means it's not just the Channel. We know it's not just actually in Europe. It is about people leaving crossing Africa, crossing the Middle East, enormous distances, and the reasons why they're actually seeking refuge in countries like the United Kingdom and crossing deserts and crossing oceans and the Channel in dinghies is because they fear for their lives. This is a high-cost activity at every level. And that hasn't been taken on board. It's just reduced to there are traffickers, there are people smugglers. Actually, when we were conducting research, this is now about 5 years ago, in terms of those who were leaving Libya and winding up in either Sicily or mostly Sicily, to some extent Malta, overwhelmingly, these were people fleeing countries where there were mass human rights abuses taking place. These were refugee-producing states. And we calculated that actually only about 18% of the people leaving at that time were what you might describe as economic migrants.
Wow, so the vast majority were.
The vast majority, yeah. And that was the southern Mediterranean. Right? I mean, the southern central Mediterranean.
And Claire, what do you make of this Rwanda policy? You're a Conservative councillor. People have been critical of it. A lot of experts saying what you need to focus on is creating safe and legal routes for people who legitimately should be given asylum. This Rwanda scheme is actually another culture war, tool of division. Do you agree with the policy? Do you agree with how it's been handled?
No, I don't agree with the policy. I think it's been handled appallingly, but that's a whole different subject. You're right. When you start looking at the routes that people come from, it isn't simple. The reasons that people are leaving their homes also isn't simple. So for the government to say we're doing this to stop the traffickers, well, it's absolutely not doing that at all. It's not going to disrupt the traffickers. All they're going to do is change their business model. So if you are saying to the public, we are going to put single men on a plane to Rwanda, well, those traffickers are just going to say, brilliant, we need some women, we need some children to put with these men, because then they're not going to be removed anywhere. So right from the start, you could see that this was doomed to failure.
So how popular do you think your view is within the Conservative Party?
Okay.
Or do you think more people agree with you than would say?
There are probably quite a few people that would agree with me and won't say it. And there's quite a lot of my party who think that I'm awful for saying it. It's a really hard mix at the moment being in the Conservative Party, because these kind of issues are what we,
red meat
issues. They are to put out there to get that support from a particular branch of the party. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that.
How would you describe that branch of the party?
It is more on the right of right wing. I always considered myself to be quite right wing until this has all happened.
Dominic Grieve made this very good point. I was saying more. He was on the programme a couple of months ago and he said what he did as a Conservative MP was have this, if you like, xenophobia. What are these strangers doing here? It's endemic across many societies, this fear of the outgroup, but absorb it and give it a solution. The problem is this provides no solution. Also reported today, I think, is that where we do have obligations, like to the Afghanis, who we have people in Afghanistan who are in danger of their life because they work for the government, it's a shambles. They cannot process them. It's the same. So having worked for a Minister of Immigration, is it all being put in rhetoric and the actual functioning system that could help people being kind of ignored and let to sort of fall apart?
The Home Office is a really big organisation. It looks after so many different things. And the one thing I always think is that immigration needs to be brought out into its own department. It is too big and it is too important to just leave it to a couple of junior ministers, which is now what it's been downgraded to. Up until 2019, we had an immigration minister who was a cabinet member. It was given that level of superiority under Theresa May. It has been downgraded to 2 parliamentary undersecretaries, which isn't good enough. When you're looking at the immigration system, the passport system, the asylum system, your border security, and you're not taking it seriously, I think that says an awful lot. I would like to see it brought into its own department. I would like to see that being, again, a cabinet position, because you cannot just continue with this rhetoric of we need to stop this and we're going to throw everything at it, and it doesn't work. So what's your next move and what is your long-term solution to it? And at the moment, there isn't one.
And so to move on to Lord Geit, so a rare resignation That's interesting. That is genuinely news. Someone has resigned from a position. The ethics advisor of Boris Johnson said that he didn't want to be put in the odious position by the Prime Minister of potentially breaking the ministerial code.
And international law.
Yeah, it's also emerged today that he didn't want to be, it had anything to do with breaking international law. Claire, what's your reaction to that?
Well, this is now the second ethics advisor that the Prime Minister has lost, which I think is spectacular. I don't think I've ever seen anything. Just a touch. And I've never seen anything like this before. The ethics advisor is there to give you the checks and balances for the decisions that you're going to make as Prime Minister. And you absolutely need to have one. And there is some rumour at the moment that he isn't going to replace that position.
As he changed the ministerial code afterwards.
And you just think, well, if you have an ethics advisor for a reason. If you don't like the decision, if you don't like the advice, well, that is, entirely up to you. But if you'll start to breach international law, the ministerial code, we're going into a section of politics which I think is really dangerous.
And how conservative is this politics? How conservative is it to potentially abolish positions of, to do with the running of the state and not replace them?
It's not my version of conservatism, and I'm really proud to be a conservative. However, at the moment, I feel sort of almost slightly politically homeless in that respect, that you're watching all of these things happen and it's almost slightly socialist state that we're going into. And I find that really quite worrying from a government which is a conservative government. It's supposed to be prudent with finances and we're putting up taxes. I'm not sure what the long-term goal is of the Prime Minister, should he have one. But it's a direction which will just isolate people like me.
And all these, but it has isolated. It's worth pointing out that though there is quite a lot of support in the Conservative Party for this particular red meat policy, 75% of its MPs, backbench, voted no confidence. Can I just widen it just to bring Brad back in? Because we're talking about the domestic audience for the... I can see, having been at the Parliament this week, this is not well regarded or just laughed at by other powers we should be seeking alliances with. But it's crucial, isn't it? The Human Rights Act and abiding by the European Court of Human Rights is not only sort of part of our legislation, it's also key to the Good Friday Agreement and actually the Northern Ireland Protocol, isn't it? Because one of the reasons that they finally was resolved in 98, 97, 98 was that as long as both sides of the border in Northern and Southern and the Republic of Ireland abided by the human court, that charter, then that was stable. Once you take that away, and same with the Northern Ireland Protocol, we're in a position of back to a kind of no deal with the EU, aren't we?
Well, yes, I mean, certainly that's what we're hearing from the EU, but it just shows that this protocol is really fragile, that this was a power-sharing arrangement that was put in place because there was this level of conflict, this level of mistrust. And so the United Kingdom actually needed that external party or that external authority in order to really cement things and hold it together.
To build the trust, in a way.
To build the trust.
Particularly of both communities.
One of the things that sort of concerned me looking at all of this is that in this country, we're regularly now, judges and, lawyers are dismissed as activists or enemies of the people. The law itself is something that's you can bend and you can shape according to what you want in terms of your own domestic political needs. And, these aspects, such as the rule of law, an independent judiciary, rights that apply to everybody, they are no longer seen as above politics. They are being regularly politicized. And, we'll come on to Sarah Churchwell very soon, and she'll be talking a lot more about this. But, even Donald Trump didn't become president and then say, well, I'm going to abolish the US Constitution and abolish the US Supreme Court and pretend the Supreme Court doesn't exist. Whereas
he did issue rather a lot of executive orders, right? He did really try to get around Congress.
And he did try to get around the election result.
But what I'm trying to say is that the ministerial code, the fact that we can just dismiss the rule of law, change it, these aspects don't sit above politics. They are ripe for being politicized.
Yeah.
Is that a
Yeah.
concern?
I think it is a concern. I mean, if you look at, everything from, you suspend regional assemblies, so people in Northern Ireland don't actually have a functioning government for a period of time. You equally can threaten Scotland with suspension. You prorogue Westminster. I mean, there are all of these infringements of the rule of law, which actually I would say, and I understand why you've used the term socialism, but actually what we're seeing is creeping authoritarianism here. Right? We're seeing that institutions of government, institutions which are central to the functioning of democracy, are being really stripped to the core.
This is an interesting point. You made this because there's a classic Burkean, a traditional Peter Oborne writes to us, is that you don't want those revolutionary situations from autocracy or right or left. But there's a good point here is that if Johnson gets away with this without any sanction, any leader from any hue can walk through these norms and know there's no punishment. So my question to you as a conservative, who believes in the rule of law, how do you create a backstop? How do you stop any leader of any hue doing this?
Well, here is the really large problem. At the moment, you aren't going to stop it, because if it's going to continue, if it's going to go down this route, which it is with the Prime Minister that we have currently, then that's what we're going to end up with. And that's as brutal as it can be. What really needs to happen is the Prime Minister needs to step back, which is something that I've called for. I mean, this makes me so unpopular with parts of my party. I've been calling for that since January of this year, that he needed to go.
But if he doesn't,
you need to have that, and that is your backstop, and that needs to happen sooner rather than later, before we get down that road.
But that's in the power of the Conservative Party. Do you not think eventually we need to get all shades of reasonable opinion to get together, and we've talked about this often, to a constitutional convention to think, now we know the weaknesses of our system, with only the Queen who cannot do anything, really ultimately as the backstop, don't we need to look at the Constitution again?
Oh, I'm really quite wary of suggesting that we need a written constitution, because it causes issues in America, as we've just discussed. It's not the be-all and end-all.
I didn't say necessarily a written constitution, that we may need to look at creaking elements of our constitution as from precedent that could be improved.
Perhaps we do, but I would suggest it's going to be a very brave person that takes that on. And I don't think that any government, anybody who gets into government of any hue, is going to have that will to do it, and that's what you need. And it may take a coalition, a rainbow coalition government that might be brave enough to do it, but I don't see it happening.
Claire, do you think just getting rid of Boris Johnson will fix everything for the Conservatives?
No, it won't.
Given this institutional change that we're seeing in terms of how government is, works and what people think they can do when they get into power.
No, it won't fix everything. The problem is that trust in politicians, trust in politics and trust in institutions around it is now so low that it is going to take some time, decades to rebuild. You speak to people on the street and you say, what do you think of politicians? And you don't want to repeat the answers that you get. It's hideous, the attitude that you get. I represent a beautiful community, but they will tell me exactly what they think. And it wasn't like that 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I think politics has become more divisive. I don't think it's going to change just by changing the man at the top, although that is a very good starting point. But I think politics as a whole and democracy in this country needs a little bit of calming down. I think it's become so divisive, so separatist almost in a way, that we need to calm this and have a proper conversation, which at the moment you just can't have.
Well, you can, of course. Talking about, and thanks so much for that, and come back, let's continue this conversation, because Boris Johnson won't be there forever, and the Conservative Party might need renewal. But we've seen where these kind of divisive conversations get to over the Atlantic, and this week saw 3 days of hearings for the January 6th committee, looking at the potential coup which happened just after the election of 2019 in January, 2020. In January 2021, thousands of people stormed and invaded the Capitol building. Earlier today, I spoke to the novelist and commentator Sarah Churchwell about what she felt about what she'd heard from this amazing testimony in Congress and how it was infinitely much worse than Watergate. So, Sarah, you've been watching 3 days so far of the proper hearings of the 6th of January House Committee. What have you made of it? I mean, you've written this brilliant book coming out in July, The Wrath to Come, which is the long history of the unsettled questions of the Civil War and the lost cause. I mean, do you watch it in that guise? Is this something historical in Congress coming to a head?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important for people to understand, because there's so much hyperbole in our general discourse, to understand that this is bigger than Watergate. This is the most extreme political corruption in American history. It is the greatest attempt to overthrow American democracy since it began. And what the hearings are establishing is the degree to which Trump was in control of the whole thing, that there was indeed a conspiracy. And so what the hearings are doing is reconstructing that inner conspiracy. Few Democrats and very few of his opponents have been interviewed. It's actually looking at what the inner workings were and how this conspiracy was set up and the historical ramifications of it.
So you say it's worse than Nixon, Watergate. Nixon's a subverted democratic process, burgled an opposition, dirty tricks. But this is that's just for people, if they remember, the certification of the vote after there was a victory in the Electoral College for Joe Biden. And two things happened. Now, we know about that first thing quite a lot because it's been documentary, which is the insurrection, which is the invasion of the Capitol by thousands of demonstrators, some of them violent, well, all of them quite violent, organized militias and things like that. People died. I had to say a family friend, Howie Liebengood, the Capitol officers committed suicide afterwards, and people are injured in that. So we know that. This is about something different. Yeah, it's not the crowd, it's the plotters.
And what they've tried to claim, and they're still trying to claim, is that crowd was spontaneous, that it got out of hand, that it acted, that they just got riled up and they suddenly stormed the Capitol. But what we're seeing is that from the Trump inner circle, as Liz Cheney laid out at the beginning of the hearings, there was a 7-point plan that the Trump administration had, and the hearings are demonstrating that 7-point plan. And they basically seem to be doing 1 point per hearing.
Right.
So they're taking us through the various attempts that they made to overturn the election. So the part that you're talking about is it's important that, particularly that non-American viewers understand this, is that the certification of the election is a rubber stamp historically. It is a ritual. It's just a pro forma. We are now sitting here in in Congress, and I pronounce that these these results are ratified. Right?
It's not purely symbolic. It's picking up the certificate afterwards.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's signing the register. No, it is. It's I now pronounce you man and wife. right. But so it's just saying that. Yeah. But you've signed the register and you've done all of the stuff, and you're just ratifying this thing and formally saying that these are the election results. And so the attempt to have a sitting vice president who just ratifies it actually overturn the results to negate them. To nullify
Mike Pence, by the way.
As Mike Pence, exactly. So Trump tried to have his own vice president nullify the results because he didn't like them. And to say that the vice president, who is the person who presides over this ritual, could just decide to change the results because you didn't like the outcome. And that is literally what Trump was pressuring Pence to do. What the hearings last night were showing was that Trump was actually on the phone with Pence, pressuring Pence to do something that he knew was illegal. Trump knew it was illegal. Pence knew it was illegal. And the inner circle, Trump's inner circle was there. They deposed Ivanka talking about it. She heard her father on the phone with Pence, trying to intimidate him, trying to threaten him, bullying him with his childish playground language. I don't know how bad your language can get, but we can edit it out if you don't like it. But so Trump called Pence a pussy for such a New York bully thing to say.
Yeah. This was I've seen photographs of them on the phone in the car park.
Yeah.
This is when Pence has fled.
Yeah, they had to take him to a safe space. So they put him in like a loading bay underneath the Capitol building to get away from Trump supporters, from his own party,
so
Trump from his own supporters.
Because Trump later on obviously capitulates at some point as saying, or kind of, I love you all, I love you, my supporters, time to go home, effectively. Yeah. But while they are trying, a woman gets shot, doesn't she? Trying to get it into House of Representatives. Yeah. But as we know, there's this amazing officer who diverts the rioters away from the Senate
Exactly. So this was hours later that Trump finally was persuaded to put out that tweet saying to stand down. And one of the things they construct here is all of the time that his inner circle was trying to get him to do it. And that was one of the things they showed last night. And that he wouldn't do it and he wouldn't do it. And they kept saying this is getting out of hand. And in fact, what they showed was him inciting them. So after Pence refused to overturn on the phone with Trump, Trump literally tweeted as they watched him. And they were like, oh, God, they watched him. Like they were in the room with him. And they were like, oh, hell, he's just tweeted to the out.
And we see the followers read it out.
Read it out loud, and then they start chanting, hang Mike Pence. So we saw a clear incitement to violence, and a clear consciousness of criminal wrongdoing, that they kept telling him this is illegal, and then he kept doing it anyway. And so he was inciting the followers to violence consciously, knowingly, and it took him hours and hours and hours. And meanwhile, the whole riot was happening. They spirited Pence away to safety. And in fact, one of the things they showed in the hearings last night was that there was one point where it turned out when they reconstructed it that the insurrectionists, and I'm not going to call them rioters, they were insurrectionists. They were there to overturn the government, and they were there to overturn the proper proceedings of democracy. Consciously. Again, that's what they were there for. And there was one point at which they were about 40 feet away from Pence and his Secret Service agents. And they basically had like one wall.
And was it Goodman, this Eugene Goodman, who actually attended there, who helped divert away by drawing them on? So this has been played out on national primetime TV, fronted mainly by Liz Cheney. Extraordinary, because she's known as kind of right-wing Republican.
Well, she's Dick Cheney's daughter.
Dick Cheney's daughter,
who was
but also
Bush's vice president.
And she's voted sort of right-wing things on most agendas. But they're getting a good audience, aren't they? I mean, they're getting 20 million.
For the first one, for the primetime hearings. The next two have been during the day U.S. time and evening UK and Europe time. Right. But it was huge. 20 million is huge numbers. 20 million Americans tuned into that 90-minute laying out of the case, which was basically a laying out of the prosecution at the beginning of any courtroom drama.
Yeah,
they lay out the case for the prosecution, and that's what they did. They did it beautifully, and they did it in a way that it's been really important actually. I think they're finally catching up and understanding that they need the video and they need it to work on TikTok and they need it to work on social media, and they're showing and they're giving the little snippets of evidence that actually lay out their case instead of this long drawn out testimony that you would have, like the Mueller report or something, where
it gets lost.
People got lost in transmission, and they've made sure that it's short and sharp and to the point. And they're showing Trump supporters saying, people like Bill Barr, who was his attorney general, saying, I thought he was detached from reality. I told him this was bullshit. I told him it was bullshit. But Bill Barr says over and over and over again, I told him it was bullshit.
And I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit.
Last night they showed Trump's personal lawyer, John Eastman, who's the one who basically cooked up. There was a great line that one of the judges said was that this was basically a coup in search of a legal theory to justify it, right? And Eastman was the lawyer who was trying to find a legal theory that could be a pretext, that they could rationalize the coup that they were determined to create. And then Eastman kept trying to pretend that he thought it was legal. He knew perfectly well it wasn't legal. They showed this last night, he sends an email saying, come to think of it, I'd quite like to be on the pardon list, which shows a consciousness of guilt, right? Yes, and then they showed him pleading the fifth, which of course is your right under the U.S. Constitution to not incriminate yourself.
Did the Trump legal team ask you to prepare a memorandum regarding the vice president's role in the counting of electoral votes at the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021? Yeah. Dr. Eastman, did you advise the President of the United States that the vice president could reject electors from 7 states and declare that the president had been reelected? Yeah. Dr. Eastman, the first sentence of the memo starts off by saying 7 states have transmitted dual slates of electors to the president of the Senate. Is that statement in this memo true?
Yeah.
Did President Trump authorize you to discuss publicly your January 4th, 2021 conversation with him?
Yeah.
So is it your position that you can discuss in the media direct conversations you had with the President of the United States, but you will not discuss those same conversations with this committee?
Yeah.
So he says basically 100 times, over 100 times in answering questions, he had to plead the fifth, which meant that if he had told the truth,
he would have
incriminated himself, which means he was breaking the law over 100 times.
So they've mastered the TikTok. There are also great moments of Jared talking about whining lawyers and things like that. But my question is to you, Fox News had 3 million viewers that night and was so concerned about not covering it. They didn't cover it, and they bought out. They had no advertising on the program that night to stop people turning over and watch it. You said you've been quite pessimistic about the future of American democracy because of this hidden, unresolved struggle which goes back to racism and the Civil War and the Confederate loss and the lost cause and all that. Did this give you a moment of hope? I mean, there are 3 million against 20 million. They are going viral. There's a big, this is evidential. This is also gripping. Or do you think America is still in these divided nation, is still in their echo chamber? And what happened in Trump world when this was all going on?
Well, this is it, right? So Bill Barr says all of that stuff. And then in promoting his book, he was asked by a reporter whether he would vote for Trump again. And he said yes. He's going to vote for Trump again. Pence is still supporting Trump and Trump voters. Trump threatened Pence's life. He endangered his life as well as American democracy. And as far as we know, Pence is still supporting Trump. He has certainly not publicly denounced him. He has not publicly repudiated him. He did not cooperate with the J6 hearings. He was not there testifying. He was not there saying they've done all of this is wrong. He has not stepped up against the election denialism. So many Trump candidates are still claiming it was a big lie, still claiming that Trump won the election, that Biden is not legitimately president. There are at least 20 candidates who are running on that basis, and Pence has not stood up and denounced them in any way. He has not spoken out against this. He's only spoken privately to the Federalist Society. So there's little bits of clippings of him doing that, but he's not publicly standing up and being counted. So the point is Trump supporters are still going to vote for Trump. And they did not take the 25th. They should have, actually, in my view.
25th, explain.
The 25th Amendment is the one that says that and they talked about a lot during Trump's administration, of course, is that if a president is found to be unfit, the vice president and a majority of his cabinet effectively can vote to remove him. And if you decide that he's unfit, and if you decide that he's crazy, and Bill Barr was saying he was detached from reality, well, that seems like a pretty good reason to at least start talking about the 25th.
But they never did.
But they didn't do it. And so the problem is that the Trump supporters are still so many of them still believe that it was a stolen election. Many of them are not prepared to admit the legitimacy of any Democratic candidate winning. That's the problem, and we're still not getting at that. Now, I don't know how much this will move the needle. No, I don't think anybody knows how much these hearings can move the needle. But the analogy that I've been using, and it's a really simple one, but I like it, and it works for British people, is football. All right, so this is a football match. Everybody knows the rules. And what we have is a situation where the captain of one team picked up the ball, ran across the goal, and shouted that he won the match, right? And what we have is a situation where all the referees who are actually the referees on the pitch are going, no, not the rules. The other team is like, well, definitely not the rules. What the hell? We won fair and square. You didn't win. But we have a situation where former referees are saying, no, I think he won. No, that's a rule. You're allowed to do that. And then half the crowd is going, no, we won. No, we definitely won. And now they're saying the next time they play the match, they're going to declare that those are the rules and that you can pick up the ball and carry it across the line and you can win. And they'll do it and they're going to announce that they've won.
Where is the ultimate problem? Do Pence and people like Barr fear Trump because of his supporters or because of Trump? So who do we need to change? The referees, what needs to happen? Do the referees have to say these are the rules, or does the crowd need to be changed or ignored, or something happen there?
The problem is that the referees and all of them they're basically getting kickbacks, right? They're being bribed. So they're all getting what they want. And as long as they keep getting, and the problem is each of them want something a little bit different. So Pence and his crowd, they want their evangelical agenda. They want the reversal of choice. They want other kinds of socially conservative agendas. They want the don't say gay agenda in Florida and in other states that's starting to spread. They want these other kinds of reactionary policy goals that they have. People like Bill Barr want money and power. That's what they want. And Trump gives it to them in spades. And he is, and some of them are just old school, mafia guys. And this is just a shakedown. So the problem is that the corruption is now endemic. And what do you do about that kind of corruption where everybody is benefiting from it? And now the crowd, but instead of in this case, we have football fans who hate the corruption of FIFA. Yes. Imagine if you have football fans who are saying,
I want to be part of it.
I love it. Yeah. It's great. They make my team win. They always make my team win. Yes. I love it. They always make sure Liverpool's champion.
Right. Well, bang goes football and bang goes democracy. Sarah, thanks so much for your insights into these hearings. We've got another 4 or 5, do you think?
Yeah, at least. So they're going to do 4 more that we know of, and they may do more through September, they're saying.
Through September. We'll definitely come back to it. Good luck with your book launch. I recommend everybody to read it. It's a fantastic and chilling read. And hopefully you'll write up something about the hearings for us at Byline Times. If not, join us. Thank you.
Thanks.
So that's it from us on Friday night with Byline Times, but we'll be back shortly with our After Dark Q&A. And Peter and myself will be joined by Brad Blitz and Claire Pearsall. So if you want to continue that fascinating conversation we were having earlier on in the show, then you can join us. So all you need to do is head over to byline.tv/join. You can look at our members area, you can sign up, and you'll get lots of access to unique content. You'll be able to go behind the scenes with our producers. But most importantly, you can join us for the After Dark conversation that will be taking place in about 5 minutes' time. So we want you with us. It was such an interesting conversation and you don't want to miss out. So byline.tv/join. Do sign up and join us for the After Dark Q&A in about 5 minutes.
And by doing that, you'll not only have a great conversation, we'll get your input and talk to our fantastic guests. You managed to keep us going. Meanwhile, before we go, as we go, people have been asking us about this new format, The Table, which is a discussion show which happens on Wednesday nights. Here's a trailer. And for everybody else, until next Friday, but for you, if you want to, come and join us after dark by signing up. Goodbye.
Welcome to The Table.
I think the Tories risk permanent, and I say this as someone who tends to lean more conservative. The Tories are risking serious and permanent reputational damage.
Let's not beat about the bush here. The Rwanda policy is essentially just racist.
But I genuinely think this party has nothing to offer young people.
There should be an acknowledgement that we need to take our fair share. And at the moment, we are the lowest per capita when it comes to taking a share.
Do you not think there are other methods
Because Esther, the problem of refugees is only going to exacerbate as we see things like, for example, climate change disasters that hit in parts of the world.
You said, I don't believe they're genuine asylum seekers, right? That's a belief. You don't know that.
But they're not according to
70%,
the government standards of what an asylum seeker is.
I wanted to reiterate that 70% of people actually do qualify as asylum seekers.
Let's move on to the next topic. So, Lenny Henry, was he wrong to make those sorts of comments?
You wouldn't catch me at a country music festival. You catch me dead, but you have to kill me to drive me there.
I think with Boris, his such grotesque disregard for any sort of dignity.
They all know each other.
Yeah.
They're all went to school with each other. They're all each other's godparents.
Can that be helped?
Well, it can't be helped. Again, it's about social mobility.
Boris is our Trump.
Yeah, but he is. He's very much our Trump.
Yeah.